The night was quiet across the Comanche plains. The only sound was the soft crackle of a dying campfire. The stars shimmered like scattered silver dust across the wide black sky, and the cool wind whispered through the tall grass like a ghost telling forgotten stories. In the heart of the camp sat Chief Dakota, a man whose presence carried both strength and sorrow. His broad shoulders bore the weight of many battles and even more losses. But the deepest wound was not one carved by an enemy's blade. It was his son, Little Hawk, who could no longer walk. The boy sat near the fire, wrapped in a fur blanket, his legs still and lifeless beneath him, his dark eyes full of questions he never asked. Dakota's heart ached every time he looked at him. He blamed himself for in one raid, one wrong choice, everything had changed. Days turned into weeks, and the boy withdrew into silence. He no longer laughed, no longer sang the tribal songs he once loved. Dakota, despite being a fierce warrior, felt powerless. His people respected him, but inside he was a father who could not heal his son's pain. That was when fate sent the storm, and with it, the white woman. She had been found by the scouts, wandering weak and terrified after escaping from another tribe's captivity, her clothes torn, her face pale and sunburned, her golden hair tangled with dust. The Comanche brought her to the village. Unsure of what to do, some wanted to send her away. Others said she might be useful as a servant. But Dakota, who rarely spoke without purpose, said quietly, "She stays," and no one dared to question him. The woman, whose name was Eleanor, barely understood their language. She only knew fear and exhaustion. She was placed in a small hut near the edge of the camp, guarded and fed sparingly. The people whispered that she was cursed, that wherever she went, tragedy followed. But Little Hawk was curious. While others feared her pale skin and foreign tongue, the boy's loneliness pulled him toward her. He would watch from a distance as she cleaned the water pots or tried to sew torn hides, her movements clumsy but determined. One morning, Eleanor saw him watching. She smiled softly and waved for the first time in months. The boy smiled back. It was small, shy, but it was a beginning. Soon, she started visiting him. She did not speak much, but she hummed tunes, gentle, wordless songs that floated like wind through the camp. Little Hawk began to wait for her each day. He tapped small stones together to mimic her rhythm. One evening, as the sun fell into the horizon, painting the sky with gold and fire, Eleanor did something unexpected. She stood before Little Hawk and began to dance. Her steps were slow at first, uncertain, her dress moving with the wind, her hands tracing invisible patterns in the air. The boy's eyes widened, his lips parted. He clapped his hands softly, laughing for the first time in so long. Across the camp, the people gathered silently, watching from afar, and among them stood Dakota. Returning from a hunting trip, his face darkened with confusion, his sharp eyes fixed on the strange sight, his captive, the white woman, dancing before his crippled son. His grip tightened around the spear in his hand. Rage flared in his chest. His people whispered behind him, some afraid, others waiting. He began walking forward slowly, each step heavy with disbelief. The music of the moment froze. Eleanor stopped dancing. The boy turned, his joy vanishing into fear. The entire camp went silent. Only the wind dared to move. Dakota stopped a few feet away, his eyes hard, his jaw clenched. He stared at her, this foreign woman who dared to touch the heart of his son. The woman who should have been broken, afraid, silent. But instead, she stood tall, trembling yet defiant, her chest rising and falling, her hands still half raised from her last dance step. She looked straight into the chief's eyes, and for a long moment neither moved. The campfire crackled louder, and Dakota's hand lifted. Everyone thought he would strike her down, but he didn't. He simply said in a low, thunderous voice, "Why?" And the white woman, breathless and shaking, answered in broken words, "Because he smiled. Dakota's heart trembled for the first time in years. He turned toward his son, who looked at him with hope, a hope that burned through years of pain. That night, something began to change in the heart of the Comanche chief. Though he didn't yet understand it, fate had just started to weave a story that would shock his entire tribe. The sun rose over the endless plains, spreading soft orange light across the Comanche village. Smoke from morning fires curled into the sky, and the sound of horses snorting mixed with the voices of women preparing food. But inside the chief's camp, a strange silence lingered. Dakota had not spoken since the night before. His mind was restless every time he closed his eyes. He saw the image of the white woman dancing, her bare feet moving across the dust, her hair glowing in the firelight, and his son's laughter echoing like the memory of a happier time. Eleanor, too, could not sleep. She feared she had angered the chief. She had only wanted to make the boy smile, yet now she might pay for it with her life. Still, when she looked at Little Hawk that morning, she knew she would do it again, because the boy's laughter was worth everything. When Dakota stepped out of his hut, the people greeted him carefully. They sensed his mood, and no one dared to ask about what had happened. Only the medicine woman, Winona, approached him. Her gray hair braided with beads, her eyes full of quiet wisdom, she said softly, "Sometimes the spirits send light through strange paths. Perhaps that woman's dance was not insult but healing." Dakota looked at her sharply. "A white woman cannot heal what the Great Spirit has taken." But Winona smiled faintly and said, "Then why does your son smile again after so long?" And she walked away before he could answer. That question burned inside him all day. When he returned to his son's tent that evening, he found Little Hawk sitting outside, carving small figures from wood. Eleanor was beside him, teaching him how to hum a soft tune. Their voices mixed like the wind through reeds. The sight stopped him. There was no fear in his son's face anymore. Only warmth. The woman turned when she saw Dakota. She stood quickly, lowering her eyes, expecting punishment, but Dakota only said, "Sit," his voice deep but calm. She obeyed silently. For a long time he watched them both, his son's small hand shaping the wood, Eleanor's pale fingers brushing away the dust. Something in the way she looked at the boy touched him. It was not pity, it was care, and pure, honest care. Something even warriors could not command. Days passed, and soon, Eleanor became part of their small circle. Though the tribe still whispered about her, she helped the elders fetch water. She learned words of their language, and sometimes when the nights were quiet, she danced again, not for attention, not for beauty, but for the boy who laughed whenever she did. Dakota began to notice that the boy's spirit was healing faster than his body. Little Hawk started to move his upper body with new strength. He learned to drum small rhythms while Eleanor danced. And sometimes he told his father, "When she dances, I forget the pain." One night, as the moon hung bright above the camp, Dakota stood outside and watched Eleanor move gracefully near the fire. Her arms spread like wings, her eyes closed, and the flames painted her skin gold. The tribe gathered silently, some amazed, others confused. But when they saw Little Hawk beating his drum with joy, no one spoke against her anymore. They could not deny the light that had returned to the boy's face. After the dance, Dakota approached her slowly, his deep voice breaking the silence. "Why do you dance, woman?" Eleanor looked down, her voice trembling. "Because I once danced for my son." Dakota frowned. "Your son?" She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "He was taken from me when the raiders came. I never saw him again when I saw your boy. I saw my child's eyes. I wanted to give him the laughter my son never had." For a moment, the great warrior said nothing. The pain in her voice struck him like an arrow. He realized that behind her fear and gentleness was a heart shattered by loss. Just like his own, he said quietly, "A mother's heart is strong, even when her feet are weak." She looked up, surprised at the kindness in his tone. From that night on, Dakota's anger began to fade. He allowed Eleanor to visit freely. He even told the tribe that she was under his protection. The people obeyed, for no one questioned their chief. Little Hawk began to speak more, to laugh more. His fingers learned to carve better, and his smile grew stronger. When he looked at Eleanor, his eyes no longer held pain, but hope. As for Dakota, though he still carried the scars of battle and pride, he started to see her not as a captive, but as a spirit sent for a reason he could not yet understand. And on one golden evening, when the sun sank behind the hills, and the shadows danced like memories, he found himself whispering to the wind, "Maybe the Great Spirit does send healing in strange ways." He didn't know then that what had begun as pity would soon become something far deeper, something powerful enough to change both their fates forever. The days turned warmer, and the camp buzzed with the sounds of summer. Children chased each other through the tall grass, warriors trained in the open field, and the air carried the scent of smoke, sweat, and freedom. Yet inside Chief Dakota's heart, peace still refused to settle. He often sat by the edge of the village, watching the horizon where the sun dipped into the golden plains. Eleanor's presence had brought laughter back to his son, but it had also stirred something deeper inside him, something he could not name. At night, when the wind whispered against the hides of his tent, he found himself thinking about her face. The way her eyes softened when she looked at his boy. The way her voice carried sadness, even when she smiled. He was a warrior, a leader, a man who had fought countless battles, yet none had confused him like this woman. Her kindness both calmed and challenged him. He began to wonder, what secret did she hide behind those gentle eyes? One evening, while the camp prepared for a great feast, Dakota saw Eleanor sitting alone near the river. The sunlight shimmered on the water, reflecting her pale face like a spirit from another world. She held a small necklace in her hands, a thin silver chain with a tiny charm that glowed faintly in the sun. Dakota approached quietly, his shadow falling across her hands. She looked up in surprise, clutching the necklace. "It was my son's," she whispered before he could speak, her voice trembling. "He wore it the day we were separated." Dakota sat beside her without a word. The river flowed softly between them, carrying stories neither dared to tell. Finally, he said, "You still believe he lives?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "A mother always believes." For a long moment, they sat in silence. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. Dakota's gaze softened. For the first time he saw her not as a captive or a stranger, but as a soul wounded like his own. That night, as the drums echoed through the camp and firelight danced on faces, Dakota found his thoughts drifting again. Winona, the old medicine woman, watched him closely. She said quietly, "Your spirit is changing, Chief." Dakota frowned. "Change is weakness," she smiled knowingly, "or strength when guided by the right heart." The next morning, the peace of the camp shattered. A scout rode in with urgent news. A small group of white men had been spotted near the eastern ridge, armed and searching. They carried the mark of traitors but looked like soldiers. Whispers spread quickly. Many feared they might come for the white woman. Dakota ordered his warriors to watch from a distance, not to engage unless necessary. But deep inside, he wondered, was this the moment she would be taken back? Eleanor heard the news too. Her heart pounded in her chest. She knew it could be dangerous if they found her. Not all white men were kind. Some might even accuse her of betrayal for staying among the tribe. That night, she sat near Little Hawk, who had fallen asleep beside the fire. She brushed a hand through his dark hair, whispering softly, "You remind me of my boy." Her tears glimmered in the firelight. Dakota approached silently, his deep voice breaking the quiet. "You fear them." She turned, startled. "I fear what they might do. They will not understand. They will think I belong to you." He looked at her firmly. "You do not belong to me." She hesitated, her lips trembling. "Then why do you protect me?" Dakota didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted toward his son, who slept peacefully. "Because when you dance, my son forgets his pain," he said finally. "And when my son smiles, I forget mine." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time not from fear. From something warmer, deeper, she whispered. "Then maybe we both needed saving." A heavy silence lingered between them, the kind that said more than words ever could. He stood there for a long moment, then turned to leave. But before he could, she said softly, "Dakota, if something happens to me, promise you'll keep the necklace safe. It's all I have left of him." He nodded once, his face unreadable. "I give you my word." The next morning, as dawn broke over the plains, smoke rose in the distance. The soldiers had entered the valley. Panic spread through the tribe. Warriors prepared their bows and women gathered their children. Dakota gave orders swiftly, sending scouts to block the path. In the confusion, Eleanor slipped away from her hut and ran toward the ridge. Clutching the silver necklace close to her heart, she needed to see. She needed to know if those men had come for her. Dakota spotted her from afar. His heart thudded in his chest. He mounted his horse and rode after her, shouting her name. As the wind whipped around her, Eleanor's eyes widened. At the top of the hill, she saw one of the soldiers holding a small object that glinted in the sun, something she recognized instantly. It was the same silver charm, the twin of the one she wore. Her breath caught, her legs froze, And in that moment, she knew. Her son was alive. But before she could move, a gunshot cracked through the air, echoing across the valley. The shot echoed through the valley like thunder. The horses reared in fear, birds scattered into the bright morning sky. And for a moment, time itself seemed to freeze. Eleanor stood on the ridge, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely breathe. Dust rose around her like smoke from a broken dream. Dakota's horse galloped across the dry earth, his eyes sharp and full of fury, his bow already drawn. Every muscle in his body burned with fear not for battle, but for her. He reached her side just as she fell to her knees, trembling but unhurt. The bullet had missed, striking a rock behind her. Small pieces of stone had grazed her shoulder. She clutched her necklace tightly as tears filled her eyes. Down the slope, a group of riders came into view. 5 men in dusty coats, rifles in hand, their faces hard and pale beneath their hats. Dakota's warriors had already taken positions along the rocks, silent as shadows. One of the men raised his hand and shouted, "We're looking for a woman, a white woman." His voice cracked through the open air. "She was taken months ago by a savage tribe. We're here to bring her back." Eleanor's lips trembled. Her eyes darted toward Dakota. She whispered, "They don't know. They'll think you kidnapped me." Dakota's expression stayed cold, unreadable. His voice was low, steady. "Do you want to go with them?" Her eyes widened in confusion. "Go with them?" He nodded slowly. "You are not a prisoner here. You are free." For a moment, her world spun. She looked down the hill again, and one of the riders lifted his head. Her heart stopped. The man had bright blue eyes, the same eyes she had seen every night in her dreams. He was older, but she knew. She knew. Her whisper broke into a cry. "My son." Dakota turned sharply. "What did you say?" Her legs gave way beneath her as she gasped. "The boy, the one with the silver charm. That's him. That's my son. He's alive." She clutched her necklace, her whole body shaking. Before Dakota could speak, the soldiers spotted them and began shouting, "There! She's with the savage! Take him down!" A second shot rang out. The bullet flew past Dakota's shoulder. He roared and drew his bow. His arrow shot like lightning, striking the ground near the men's horses. The frightened animals reared, throwing 2 of the riders to the dirt. The Comanche warriors responded instantly, arrows cutting through the air, dust rising in thick clouds. Chaos erupted across the ridge. Eleanor screamed for them to stop, her voice lost in the noise. She ran forward, waving her hands. "Stop! Please stop!" But no one listened. Dakota leapt from his horse, pulling her behind a large boulder, his hand firm on her arm. "Stay down," he shouted. Tears streamed down her face. "They're not enemies. They're just looking for me." Dakota's voice was like stone. "They shot first. They came with hate, not peace." The battle raged for only minutes, but it felt endless. 2 of the soldiers fled on horseback. The others surrendered when surrounded by Comanche warriors. The dust settled slowly, leaving only silence and the smell of smoke. Eleanor's heart broke when she saw the boy among them. Thin, sunburned, his face dirty, but his blue eyes bright, the same eyes she had kissed goodbye years ago. She rushed to him, falling to her knees, pulling him into her arms. "Eli, my baby." The boy froze for a second, then whispered in disbelief, "Mama." His small arms wrapped around her neck, his voice trembling with tears. "I thought you were dead." Dakota watched from a distance, his chest heavy. He had seen countless reunions on battlefields, but never one that hurt this much. He felt both relief and loss, as if something sacred was being taken from him. Winona approached quietly, her old eyes soft. "The spirits have returned what was lost," she said. "But every return carries a price." Dakota said nothing, his gaze fixed on Eleanor, who rocked her child and sobbed. The boy clung to her as if afraid to let go again. When the remaining soldiers finally spoke, they explained they had found the boy months ago during a raid. They didn't know his mother lived. They had only followed rumors of a white woman among the Comanche. Dakota stood before them, his tall frame casting a long shadow. "You came here with weapons," Not peace, his voice thundered. But I will not kill men who came for a child. He turned to his warriors. Let them go. The men hesitated, shocked by his mercy, but they obeyed. Eleanor stood, her face streaked with tears, her hands trembling as she said softly, "You saved me, and you gave me back my son." Dakota met her eyes, his voice low. "Perhaps you were never meant to be lost, only found." The sun dipped low, painting the sky red and gold. The boy leaned against his mother, and for the first time in many moons, the chief felt something break inside him. Not pain, but something gentler, something he could no longer deny. Yet as night fell, he looked toward the horizon, knowing this peace could not last because in the heart of every warrior and every mother, destiny always had another turn waiting. The sky was heavy with clouds that night. The scent of smoke still lingered over the plains. Though the battle had ended, the air carried a quiet unease. In the center of the camp, the fires flickered low, and the people spoke in whispers. Eleanor sat beside her sleeping son, her arms wrapped around him protectively. Every now and then she touched his hair, afraid he might vanish if she looked away. Dakota watched from a distance, his strong face unreadable, but his heart felt torn in two. He had fought for her, risked his life to protect her, and now, seeing her reunited with her child, he felt both joy and emptiness. He told himself it was right, that she should return to her people. Yet the thought of her leaving made his chest tighten like a rope around his heart. Winona, the old healer, approached him quietly, her steps slow and sure. "The Great Spirit gives, and the Great Spirit takes," she murmured. "You saved her for a reason, but every path leads to a crossroad." Dakota looked toward the fire, his voice deep and low. "The boy has a mother again, but my son has a reason to smile because of her. If she leaves, his heart will break again." Winona nodded. "Then perhaps it is time for both hearts to learn what it means to let go." The next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds. Eleanor woke to the sound of horses and drums. The tribe was preparing a farewell ceremony, a gesture of peace to send her and the boy back safely. Her heart sank as she realized what it meant. She walked to Dakota's tent, her steps hesitant. He stood outside sharpening his spear, his eyes calm but distant. She said softly, "You're sending us away." He didn't look up. "You belong with your people. The boy needs a home where he can grow." Her voice trembled. "We had a home once. It burned. The soldiers saved my son. But they destroyed everything else. I have nothing to go back to." Dakota finally looked at her, his eyes dark as thunderclouds. "Among the Comanche, a mother and her child are sacred. But your place is not here. The people still whisper. They still fear you." Eleanor took a step closer, her voice firm. "Do you fear me too?" He froze for a moment, then said quietly, "I fear what I feel when I look at you." The words hung heavy between them. She turned away, unable to speak, her heart pounding. She had felt it too. The strange bond that had grown between them. One built not from words, but from the quiet moments they shared. From his kindness, his strength, and the way he had protected her like no one ever had. That afternoon, Dakota gathered the tribe. He stood tall before his people, the wind whipping through his hair. "This woman and her son are under my protection," he declared. "They will leave in peace," some of the warriors murmured in disagreement. But no one dared challenge him. Before sunset, Eleanor packed the few things she had: the necklace, a blanket, a small carving Little Hawk had made for her. Her son held her hand tightly, looking around the camp that had become his strange, temporary home. As she passed Little Hawk's tent, the boy reached out for her, his small fingers trembling. "Will you come back?" he asked softly, his voice breaking. Eleanor knelt beside him, brushing his cheek. "If the spirits allow." "I will," she whispered. "You must keep dancing with your heart. Even when I am not here." The boy nodded, tears glistening in his eyes, and handed her a wooden bird he had carved. "So you don't forget," he said. She hugged him tightly, the boy's frail legs resting against hers, and she whispered, "I could never forget you." Dakota watched from a distance, his chest burning with emotion he could not show. When she turned to face him, he stepped forward slowly, handing her a pouch of food and water. "The trail is long," he said quietly. "You will be safe if you follow the river south." She took the pouch, her fingers brushing his. The touch lingered longer than either expected. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes glimmering. "For everything," he nodded once. "Go before the stars rise," his voice was steady. but his heart was breaking. As she mounted the small horse they had given her, her son sitting in front of her, she looked back one last time. The village stood behind her, bathed in golden light, the smoke rising like memory, and Dakota stood tall, his figure outlined against the fire. The boy waved to Little Hawk, who waved back weakly from his blanket, and for a moment the two worlds, white and red, sorrow and hope, seemed to blend together like colors in the fading sky. When Eleanor finally turned and rode into the horizon, Dakota stood motionless until the last shadow disappeared. His warriors went back to their tents, but he remained alone, the wind tugging at his hair, the fire flickering at his side. Winona came once more, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You let her go with your hands," she said softly, "but not with your heart." Dakota closed his eyes, whispering into the night. "The Great Spirit took her away, but maybe one day he will bring her back." The fire cracked. The stars blinked awake one by one, and in that endless silence, the mighty chief finally lowered his head, not as a warrior, but as a man who had lost something he never thought he could feel: love. The moon floated high above the plains like a silent watcher. Weeks had passed since Eleanor and her son had left the Comanche camp, yet the memory of that night still burned in Dakota's heart like an ember that refused to die. He spent his evenings alone beside the fire, his eyes often drifting toward the horizon where she had disappeared. Little Hawk had grown quieter again. Though he smiled sometimes, his spirit seemed dimmer. The woman's laughter that once filled their camp had left behind a hollow silence. Dakota feared his son's light was fading once more. One evening, as the chief sat sharpening his blade, one of his scouts approached, his breath heavy, his horse dripping with sweat. "Chief," he said urgently, "we found something strange near the southern trail. Signs of struggle, and a broken wagon." Dakota's heart tightened. He rose instantly. "Were there tracks?" "Yes," the scout said. "A woman and a child, but they were not alone. Others followed them, men with rifles, not soldiers and raiders." The fire in Dakota's eyes ignited again. Without another word, he gathered 5 of his finest warriors, including his brother Matto, a fierce fighter with a scar across his cheek. They rode out under the silver moonlight, the wind cold against their faces. Hours passed before they reached the river's bend. There, by the broken wagon, Dakota dismounted, his hand brushing over footprints in the dirt. The prints were small, a woman's bare foot and a child's smaller ones beside it. His jaw tightened. "She was here," he whispered. Matto looked around carefully. "The raiders dragged something, maybe a body." Dakota's voice turned sharp. "Not a body." "Someone alive." They followed the tracks deeper into the canyon until they saw a faint glow. A campfire hidden behind the rocks. Voices echoed faintly through the night, rough and cruel, men laughing over their stolen goods. Dakota crouched low, peering through the shadows, and there she was, Eleanor, her wrists tied, sitting close to her son, her face pale but defiant, her arms shielding the boy. The sight filled Dakota with both rage and relief. He whispered to his men, "No mistakes. We move like ghosts." The attack came swift as thunder. Arrows flew. Warriors moved silently through the smoke. The raiders shouted in panic. One tried to grab Eleanor, but Dakota was faster. His tomahawk struck his arm, sending him crashing to the ground. The boy screamed. Eleanor pulled him close, her eyes wide with shock, and then she saw him. The tall warrior emerging through the chaos like a shadow of destiny, his long hair whipping in the wind, his eyes burning with fury. "Dakota," she breathed, unable to believe it. When the last raider fell, silence returned. The fire hissed in the cold wind. Dakota knelt beside her, cutting her ropes, his voice low and steady. "You should have stayed near the river." Her hands trembled as she touched his arm. "I thought the path was safe. Until they came." The boy clung to her, whispering, "Mama." He came back. Dakota gave the child a faint smile. "Your spirit called to me," he said quietly. "And I listened." They buried the raiders in silence, leaving no trace, but before dawn, Dakota noticed something else. Strange symbols marked on the raiders' packs, a black serpent carved into wood. He recognized it instantly. They were not ordinary thieves. They were part of a secret band that traded captives for gold, a group that had been hunting both white settlers and natives alike. He turned to Matto, his tone hard. "They were close to our borders. We cannot ignore this," Matto frowned. "Then we fight." Dakota shook his head. "Not yet. First we protect what matters." His gaze shifted toward Eleanor and her son, sleeping under his blanket near the ashes of the fire. At sunrise, they began their return journey. Eleanor rode beside Dakota, her son resting against her chest. She looked at him and said softly, "You risked your life again. Why?" Dakota's eyes stayed forward, his voice deep. "Because I gave you my word." "But you could have died," she whispered. He looked at her then, his gaze steady and full of unspoken emotion. "Some promises are worth dying for." The trail was long and quiet. Only the sound of hooves and wind filled the air. When they finally reached the edge of the Comanche Valley, Eleanor stopped her horse, staring at the familiar hills. The place she had once thought she'd never see again. The people watched in surprise as Dakota entered with her once more. The same woman they thought was gone forever. Winona came forward, her old eyes wide. "The spirits bring her back, as I said they would," she murmured. Smiling faintly, Eleanor dismounted slowly. Her son clutching her hand, she looked around at the people. Some stared in silence. Others whispered in awe. Dakota turned to his warriors and said, "She is not a captive, she is under my protection again. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me." The tribe bowed their heads. No one argued that night as the fire burned high and the stars filled the sky. Dakota sat apart, staring into the flames. Winona joined him quietly. "You have been tested," she said softly. "Not by enemies, but by your own heart." Dakota nodded slowly. "And what did I learn?" The old woman smiled. "That honor is not in power or victory, but in what you protect when the world tries to take it away." He looked toward the other side of the camp, where Eleanor sang softly to her son, her voice gentle as the night breeze, and he knew the truth. The battle within him had only begun. Because protecting her had become more than duty, it had become the test of his soul. The air was heavy with warmth as summer settled over the valley. The tall grass swayed under the soft wind, and the sound of drums echoed faintly in the distance. In the Comanche camp, life had returned to its rhythm, yet something deep had changed, something no one dared to speak aloud. Eleanor and her son had found safety again, but peace came with whispers. Every time she passed, some women turned away, some warriors exchanged glances. They remembered she was the white woman who had once left, and now had returned under the protection of their chief. Dakota felt the unease in his people's hearts. He could command loyalty but not silence judgment. Still he stood firm. His word was law, and his heart, though he never spoke of it, had already chosen where it belonged. At dusk, when the camp quieted, Eleanor would often sit near the river, her son asleep beside her. She would hum softly, her voice blending with the wind. Sometimes Dakota would join her in silence, neither speaking, both watching the moonlight ripple across the water. One night she said softly, "I've seen the way they look at me. Your people don't want me here." Dakota turned his head, his face calm but his eyes deep. "They fear what they don't understand." She smiled faintly. "And you? Do you fear it too?"
He hesitated, the firelight flickering across his strong features.
"I fear nothing," he said, but his voice trembled just slightly, enough for her to hear the truth behind it. Her gaze softened. "You've saved me more than once, Dakota, but you've also saved something inside me, something that died long ago." He looked at her with quiet strength. "And what is that?" "Hope," she whispered, her eyes glistening. Their eyes met and held, the silence between them thick with emotion neither dared to name. Dakota felt a storm building inside him. He was a warrior, a leader, a man bound by duty. Yet his heart beat not for his tribe in that moment, but for her. The next morning the storm broke, not in the sky, but within the camp. 3 warriors from a neighboring band arrived, carrying gifts of peace and a request to trade. But one of them, a proud man named Kano, noticed Eleanor fetching water near the river. His eyes darkened with disdain. He turned to Dakota during the council and said boldly, "You lead with honor, Chief. Yet I see you sheltering a white woman in your camp. What message does that send to your warriors? That the blood of your enemies is welcome among us?" A ripple of unease spread through the gathered men. Dakota's jaw tightened. "She is under my protection," he said. His tone cold. Kano smirked. "Or under your spell." The insult struck like a spear. Mato, Dakota's brother, rose angrily. "Watch your tongue," he warned. But Dakota raised his hand for silence. His eyes locked on Kano. "You speak like a man who hides his weakness behind words," Kano laughed. "Then prove I'm wrong. Choose your people or your prisoner." The camp fell silent, even the wind seemed to pause. Every face turned toward their chief, waiting. Testing. Dakota's heart pounded like the beating of war drums. He could feel Eleanor's gaze from across the camp. He could feel the weight of every eye. He stood slowly, his presence commanding, his voice deep and steady. A chief's strength is not in his hatred, but in his honor. She is no prisoner. She is a woman who suffered, a mother who loves. And anyone who raises a hand against her raises it against me. The words rolled through the camp like thunder. The warriors lowered their heads in respect. But Kano's pride burned. He spat at the ground and said, "Then you have chosen her over your blood," and stormed away. That night, tension filled the air. Dakota knew the man's words would spread. He sat alone near the fire. Winona approached him quietly. "Love and leadership rarely walk the same path," she murmured. "If you follow your heart, your people may turn away." Dakota stared into the flames. "And if I turn away from my heart?" "Then you lose yourself," she replied simply. Later, as the camp slept, Eleanor came to him, her footsteps soft, her face lit by the glow of the fire. "You stood for me," she whispered. "But you shouldn't have to fight your own people for my sake." He shook his head slowly. "A man does not fight for what he must, he fights for what he cannot forget." Her eyes shimmered with tears. She moved closer. The fire crackled between them, her voice trembling. "What if I am your mistake?" Dakota's voice dropped low, almost a whisper. "Then I will live with it." Gladly. For a long moment they said nothing. The only sound was the whisper of the wind and the quiet beating of two hearts that no longer belonged to separate worlds. But far beyond the camp, in the darkness of the hills, eyes watched them. Kano and a few of his men sat hidden among the rocks. Anger and jealousy twisting inside them, he said quietly, "If the chief has forgotten who he is, then we will remind him." Back in the camp, Eleanor leaned her head against Dakota's shoulder, unaware of the danger creeping closer, unaware that before the next sunrise, love and loyalty would be tested by betrayal sharper than any blade. The night was deep and still. The stars scattered like silver dust across the wide sky. A faint breeze moved through the Comanche Valley, carrying whispers of both peace and danger. Dakota sat near the dying fire, his thoughts heavy, his heart torn between duty and love. Somewhere inside him he felt the storm was not over. It was only waiting to strike inside her tent. Eleanor slept beside her son, the child's small hand resting against her heart. She dreamed of quiet mornings in safe places, unaware that eyes full of hate watched her from the shadows. Kano and his men crept near the camp's edge, their faces painted with anger. They whispered among themselves, "He has forgotten who he is. Tonight we remind him." Kano raised his blade, his voice low. "The white woman is the poison, remove her, and the chief will remember his blood." But destiny moves faster than hatred. Little Hawk, who had awakened to fetch water, saw the shadows moving near Eleanor's tent. Fear rushed through his body, yet his heart, still brave despite his legs, made him cry out, "Father!" Dakota's head snapped up, his warrior instincts returning like fire. He grabbed his spear and ran toward the sound. The camp stirred. Men rose from their sleep. Dogs barked wildly. In the chaos, one of Kano's men lunged toward Eleanor's tent, his knife flashing under the moonlight. Eleanor shielded her son, crying out. But before the blade could strike, Dakota's spear flew through the air and struck the man down. The force of it sent him crashing backward into the dirt. Kano stepped forward, rage twisting his face. "You fight for her again, even against your own," he shouted. Dakota's eyes burned like embers. "I fight for what is right," he said, his voice steady as thunder. The two men circled each other. The camp gathered around. Watching in tense silence, no one dared move. The firelight flickered across their faces, one filled with pride, the other with conviction. Kano lunged first, his blade slicing through the air. Dakota blocked with his tomahawk. Sparks flew as metal clashed. The sound echoed across the valley. They fought like beasts of equal strength, every strike fueled by years of unspoken resentment. Eleanor clutched her son, tears streaming down her face. "Please stop," she whispered. But the battle raged on. Kano's rage gave him speed, but Dakota's purpose gave him power. Finally, with one fierce strike, Dakota disarmed him, sending his blade flying into the dirt. Kano stumbled, his breath heavy, his pride broken. Dakota raised his tomahawk high, but stopped, his voice low and calm. "I will not kill my brother," he said. "The Great Spirit sees all, and he will judge who has lost his way." Kano fell to his knees. Defeated, the camp remained silent. No one spoke. The fire cracked and hissed as if it too waited for the night to breathe again. Dakota turned to his people. his voice rising strong and clear. You call her poison, but she has brought healing. You call her foreign, but she has given our children laughter again. She stands not as an enemy, but as proof that the Great Spirit binds all hearts with the same thread. The crowd bowed their heads slowly, one by one. Even those who had doubted began to understand. Eleanor looked at him through tears, her heart overflowing. She stepped forward and whispered, "Why did you stop?" "He would have killed me." Dakota looked at her gently. "Because love is not shown in death, it is proven in mercy." As dawn began to rise, painting the plains gold, the tribe gathered again. The air was lighter. The fear gone, Little Hawk sat beside his father, smiling faintly. "Father," he said, "you fought for her." Dakota smiled softly, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "I fought for truth." Eleanor knelt beside them, her son holding her hand. The warmth of the rising sun touched their faces. Dakota looked at her, his voice calm. "Your path is still yours to walk if you wish to go. No one will stop you." She looked at the horizon, then back at him, her eyes full of quiet strength. "My home is where I am seen, where my heart is safe. And that is here." The wind blew softly, carrying her words through the camp. Winona, the old healer, smiled from afar. "The spirits have spoken," she whispered. "Two worlds do not divide. They heal when joined." Dakota stood tall, his eyes fixed on the sky, and for the first time in years, peace settled over him completely. The woman he had once seen as a burden had become his greatest blessing. The boy who could not walk now laughed again, and the tribe that once judged had learned compassion. As the sun rose fully, painting the earth with fire and gold, Dakota spoke quietly. "The Great Spirit gives love where the world least expects it." Eleanor smiled, holding her son close. "And sometimes," she said softly, "he brings enemies together to remind them they were never enemies at all." The drums of the camp began to beat again, not for war, but for life. And as the day began, the Comanche chief, the woman of another world, and the two children, one walking, one learning to, were stood together under the endless sky. Their story, once born of pain, had become a legend of unity, forgiveness, and love strong enough to bridge two worlds.